Good morning again, everyone. As you know, and Ellen already mentioned, we are fortunate because we know many of you through our association with Westchester Library Systems and being present in person together in the past. My name again is Susan Carrol. I'm the Director of Training, Outreach, and Education at the Pace Women's Justice Center. I'm here with my colleague, Roberta Goodman, who is a Senior Staff Attorney in the Elder Justice Unit. And we are very appreciative of your efforts to continue to be engaged and help people out even in this, frightening and difficult time. Our topic this morning is close to home for us, and I'm sure it's also what you deal with when you're in the library system face-to-face, as you have been up to mid-March. It's the issues around this health pandemic and how it affects populations who are experiencing both elder abuse and domestic violence. Now, it affects all of us, and I'm sure if we had the time, and you've probably had some conversation as well, you could tell me in the large and small ways it's upended your life and your family's life. But what we found in the work with our clients is it's a whole new world, and can be a very difficult world. Overnight, from mid-March on just about, the landscape has changed for people seeking judicial intervention or help from the police department, or even just a consultation with an attorney to try to find out what their options are and how to make themselves safer. As you know, I'm sure if you've tried to get a doctor's appointment or had to cancel a dentist appointment, or even little things, found that because of this health pandemic, the nature of our interactions here in New York, a hotspot, is that we are no longer having face-to-face communications in the professional arena. If we have to go to the grocery store now, we mask up, we limit it to as few trips as possible. We probably all canceled dental appointments or unnecessary doctor's appointments, and we're putting things off. And what we can't put off, what we need to do, if at all possible, we've been trying to do it in ways like this, through virtual meetings. The problem with our client base and the same people you're helping in the library all the time is that they are not, these weren't pre-existing appointments with a lawyer that now they're getting an email to consult virtually, or they're going to have the system set up already where they have support and shelter in place, and then they're seeking an additional piece. And what they're also dealing with is that they're often sheltering in place with their abuser. So I'm going to focus a little bit now on how that's affected our intimate partner clients that are experiencing violence at home. And Roberta, in a few minutes, will focus on our older adult population, and not that old, by example, I mean to say, because in New York State, the way the laws are written and the way they consider a senior is 60 and above, which is pretty young as far as I'm concerned. But focusing first on the intimate partners, and again, just a reminder, which I'm sure you all know, you can experience that kind of abuse from middle school on up to 100, unfortunately. There's no barrier, both in terms of your age or in terms of your economic or education level. We see clients from across Westchester and Putnam, not just in urban areas, not just in certain populations. They can be in our wealthiest communities as well as our perhaps most limited resource communities. What they have in common, unfortunately, is for many of these clients is that they're experiencing this abuse, and because of the number of factors that keep them in that situation, they are not able to reach out for help in a way that protects them. And as you know, the stat, they say it takes about 7 times for a victim of intimate partner abuse to reach out. I would say we've found with our clients, in some fashion, it can be much longer than 7 times. And what's changed about this health crisis is when the world became shut down and virtual, for these clients overnight, they were no longer going to their schools or their jobs or the library or the senior nutrition room or any fun activities. They're now isolated at home. And if they've been living with the abuser, or the abuser has returned home due to financial problems or, perhaps other reasons, that they're now sheltering in place with someone who is not keeping them safe. I know we touched on this before we started with your question, but the other aspect of intimate partner violence is there's a number of different types of violence. It's not just physical. It's not just what people used to think, the bruise or the punch, and that's domestic violence or intimate partner violence. It can be financial, it can be sexual, it can certainly be verbal or emotional, and that can be a hallmark of these relationships from the time they start to perhaps the end of that relationship, if it does end in some fashion. So for our clients, when they're now sheltering at home, they no longer have the access outside the home to get any freedom to make a phone call to a lawyer, to speak to someone they trust, such as one of you they've seen their faces in the library and they've been asking questions about Medicaid or other things, and now they can ask for another resource. They don't have that option anymore. They likely have no privacy. I mean, I can speak personally. I'm working at home with my husband and 2 teenage daughters, and oftentimes during the day we're scrambling for a quiet space away from the dog to have a Zoom conversation or a phone conversation that doesn't seem like we are distracted or not giving our full attention to the people we're trying to engage with. But if you're a victim of abuse and you're living in that situation, you clearly are not likely very comfortable to have a discussion like this, knowing your abuser is downstairs listening in or in the room next door. You've also had the addition for some of these intimate partner victims, if they've got younger families, on top of being with the abuser sheltering in place, they're managing having their children at home as well. And if this family had financial concerns, and even if they didn't at the start of this pandemic, as we've seen with the numbers of unemployment claims filed, the ground is shifting economically, for almost all of us. And certainly that's true with some of these families who are living both with violence and abuse and the uncertainty of the new financial situation and job loss. So their children are not going to school. If they had the ability to get free meals or discounted meals at school, they're not having that option anymore. So they're all experiencing that financial stress and having to take care of their children. They're also trying to do either, educate their kids at home through web applications, or at least manage the children in a way that won't upset or offend the abuser while they're trying to stay safe themselves. A sad note and a side note is, I don't know if you've been seeing, but apparently, not to be surprised by this, that sales of alcohol are up, both online sales as well as in person, since liquor stores are still open. If you have an abuser and many of them do, in addition to focusing their anger and attention on people they're targeting, are also abusing some sort of substances at home, then it's even more volatile, because that abuser is not necessarily, unless they're working in an essential job right now, they're not leaving the house either. So they are there 24/7, and if they're a substance abuser, then they're likely abusing substances in the home, with their partner and their kids. We're not having, those same interactions for any part of that family. So the children too are not getting the services they need at school. They're not able to communicate with the teachers, or if they're suffering abuse or the emotional abuse of being in this kind of family situation, they don't have any outside resources as well. The other restriction we see is our police departments. I'm sure you've seen this as well on LOHUD and local papers, much like the fire department in New York City. All their numbers are down. One department, Greenberg, I think, last week had of 114 officers in their department, they had over 30 of them out sick. And since only some of them are slated to work each shift in different departments, it puts a strain on what those officers can do. A number of departments, including down in Yonkers, which used to have specialized divisions, including divisions that would help just intimate partner violence victims or elder abuse victims, has now gone to straight patrol, because they have so many police officers who are out sick that they cannot staff their departments in the same way. And everyone, even people who've perhaps been on the job for 12 or 14 years, is now in a patrol car. What does that mean as well? Layering that on top of our new bail reforms, where some of these offenses, which in the past, perhaps if they had gone before a judge, may have caused the judge to set bail or certain restrictions. Now we have, and for good reason, we've had an effort to reform bail in New York State. But as an aside, we have police departments who, are experiencing the pandemic as well. We have judges who may or may not be sitting. In northern Westchester, for example, a couple weeks ago, in our local town courts, several of them had been out sick. And when the judges are out sick, when you've only got 1 or 2 judges in one town, then you don't have anyone hearing a case. And what happens is, if in that small town in northern Westchester, they make an arrest which allows them to go before a judge and ask for an order of protection, even if it means that judge under the new bail reform would automatically have to release that individual without any bail conditions. Many of those departments were between a rock and a hard place because they were told to hold that individual overnight and then bring them the next day down to White Plains. And for these small departments, they were telling the court system that they didn't have the staffing power to hold an individual in a cell overnight, because that meant several officers would have to be in the command overnight watching that person and then driving that person down to White Plains. This is all before the remote access. The other problem, of course, with this is because there's no face-to-face, and we're going to get into in a few minutes what the New York State court system has decided about that. The court system has tried almost overnight to try to reboot itself to allow for the same kind of conversations we're having right now, remote access applications. The problem is it's an antiquated system that's not set up that way, that is a mix of smaller courts in different communities in northern Westchester and then the larger courts. And we have in New York State, and fortunately PACE was a part of it, a pilot program for remote access, temporary order of protection, family offense petitions. That has been going on for several years, and it's a great program, but it was only set up, of course, to allow that initial petition to be remote access. And even that was a small number of cases each day. And as we found, as wonderful as that system is, what would have taken maybe 10 minutes face-to-face with a judge, or less than that, more waiting time than that. I've heard from my colleagues, and I think Roberta has heard the same, that sometimes just trying to have an initial order heard right now can take the better part of 2.5 hours for what might be a 2-minute conversation with a judge where the court system is unable to get the litigant on the phone or the client, and it ends up being, problems with the Skype for Business application. So there's a lot of frustration on all levels as we deal with this. Additionally, what we're seeing in our clients, what have we been hearing for the last few weeks? And this is probably akin to what you've been reading. This virus has been used by some abusers, or many abusers, as a weapon. And what do I mean by that? If couples are separated and they have young children together, even if there's a temporary visitation and custody situation set up, which is often the case for many of these clients because people don't have the funds to get divorced. Divorces take an attorney, and if you're paying privately, that can be an expensive process and a lengthy process. And some of those cases have sort of gone on hiatus in sense as a non-essential petition at the moment. But for these families who had these temporary custody and visitation situations set up, the abuser perhaps may have had the child and then say to that client, I'm not going to return the child. I don't like, I think you're living in a dangerous part. For example, we had a client who was in New Rochelle, and the abuser ex-partner said, yes, I have the child for visitation, but you live in a hotspot even within Westchester, so I don't think it's safe to return the child to you, so I'm keeping the child. Additionally, they've used it as a weapon to say, I'm not paying support right now. I haven't been working, or I've been working less, and I'm concerned about my financial security going forward. So I'm not going to give you the $125 a week or $75 a week, what minimal amount I was paying you. And right now, at least, or at the start, some of these considerations, the court was not, because of the overwhelming nature of setting up and dealing with these aspects, was not yet entertaining these types of petitions. They think, much like the rest of the world are, and we know this from what we've seen from our executive orders, and Roberta will discuss in a moment, but this is changing slowly. I know one of our colleagues was on the phone with the court and Judge Davison last week talking about it, and that Judge Davison is definitely very amenable to helping these clients and certainly wants to hear about these situations because she understands that this access to court issue right now is a huge problem for clients who are suffering abuse, be they younger abuse victims or our seniors. And she's trying to facilitate a way to get more of these cases to court. What we've been trying to do in talking to our clients is to make sure they're, setting up a record and documenting what they do while they're awaiting a chance to go before the judge. And what do I mean by that? If they feel, for example, that they have a young child and that their former partner is not being safe. Perhaps they're not following the CDC guidelines, not keeping people out of the home. Perhaps they are a user and they're not, they're in a situation where they know the children will be shuttled around during that visitation, and they're saying that it's not safe and they, don't feel comfortable putting their child at risk. Then we are trying to engage with, if there is an attorney on the other side, to start that communication, document it, to work together to find a solution. If there can't be face-to-face visits at this time, to try to do the type of visitation or discussion we're doing right now, meaning make sure you're allowing clients access to see their kids or talk to them through Zoom. We've had several clients whose abusive partners have withheld the children. And at minimum, we're trying to make sure that our clients get some Zoom time now to at least be able to see the child, talk to the child. If it's not a great scenario, to try to get some face-to-face time, albeit remotely, to start to assess what's going on. We know that the courts are opening up now. So we are hopeful that more people will be able to access this system for support. We want to make sure we're sending the message to all of you, and I know we're going to get into a bit, that help is still out there, that although we all used to interact with people in need, has changed and may change for a while until, whatever happens that allows us to engage the way we used to engage, be it more testing, flattening the curve, vaccine, hopefully long before that, but that we want to make sure that we are not ignoring these people in need in our community, and that we're finding a way to help them. So part of what we do in addition is we're certainly engaging with them in this way through remote access and also through the phone. But we're trying to remind people as well that officers are still there for assistance, and that you can still, what is considered an essential petition is an emergency family offense petition, meaning going via remote access, the same way we're doing this through the computer, to work with an attorney. For example, our attorneys are still providing these services and representing people through Skype for Business in the court system, and making sure that people have that opportunity. Any order protection that is pending, because of course, when this pandemic started, there, much like our own personal calendars, there were a whole host of dates on the court calendars to come back for a hearing or trial. Hearings and trials in family court have been temporarily put off for now, although things are changing as we start to open up. But what the court system rightfully recognized is they automatically extended those temporary orders of protection that are in existence. So they're extended out about 90 days. Again, our concerns, and I want to highlight this and then I'll let Roberta talk about how it's impacting her clients, is one of the big aspects when we're trying to seek petitions is if you're living with your abuser and it's a volatile situation, many times our clients will determine that the safest ask of the court is to ask that person to be vacated, meaning go to court, allege offenses which are concurrent with the criminal court, such as assault, stalking, harassment, and ask that judge in that ex parte application to remove that abusive person from your home. Now, because we are in this pandemic and our shelter system was always on a good day stretched in Westchester County, is now stretched beyond belief. There's a shelter that's operated by my sister's place, and I know that they had a client who was being quarantined because they felt that client could have COVID-19, coronavirus. But then, of course, that's a concern for the rest of the population in that house, and how many others, or how they can bring in any new clients to that house. So when our clients are considering both the application, and the court too is considering what determination they're going to make, our concern remains is how can we, even with the judicial intervention, now that people don't have the ability to go to work, to leave home, may not be working right now given the fact that so many jobs have been lost, how we can work, our office can work with other agencies in Westchester County and with other people to find solutions for these clients, men and women and teenagers, that will make them safer, understanding that some of our normal options are not what they were a month ago. Roberta, did you want to chime in a little bit about what you're experiencing in your client base?
Certainly. So with our clients who are, as Susan mentioned, 60 and older, because that is the definition of a senior in Westchester County and in New York State, what we are finding is the social isolation, the social distancing, and it results in a multitude of issues. One is that for our older population who may not have access to electronics, they are hugely impacted because we can't connect with them electronically. Since we cannot have face-to-face meetings and they may not have the ability to have a computer that would allow them to talk with us. And while we are still open for business while working remotely, we need to be able to see the person who is seeking our assistance. We need to see them on a screen to be able to determine that this is someone who, and this is a stretch, who has the capacity. I mean, it's very hard to make a capacity determination under the best of circumstances, but to do it when you're looking at someone who's on a screen. And then again, is there someone else in the room? You know, we have concerns about whether there's undue influence. So we are having some challenges with the extreme end of our population that may not have access to the electronics. Adult Protective Services is still making face-to-face client contact, providing that it is safe for them to do so. Their office is staffed with a few senior caseworkers who go in and a couple who are in the field, but it's very challenging for them. The other agencies that we work with, Family Services of Westchester, they are only doing remote visits with clients. And so perhaps it's telephonically for them. They are still taking referrals. I know that the library has been an amazing haven for all of the population. You know, I'm a huge fan of the library system and the programs that have been offered to individuals. Yes, you have programs that are available online, but you had people inside that would sit down with an individual and help them go through a Medicare application or discuss perhaps some of the new rules that are, not to give lawyer advice, but the new rules that are coming down with the Medicaid requirements, and to talk with them about Social Security options and give them the phone numbers of where they could go to contact different representatives of government agencies, and to put them in touch with places like Legal Services of the Hudson Valley or the Pace Women's Justice Center. I don't know how that's working for the library system. Are people telephoning in because they can't come into the library and they can't use your computers? So that's something that we are thinking about and not sure quite how to address when someone doesn't have a computer. We're still using the postal service. I have a client that I'm working with who has a credit card issue, and she is having difficulty making her bills. I've only been able to speak with her by telephone because she doesn't have a computer. So now I'm mailing things to her so that we can establish a relationship with one another, and then she will mail it back to me so I can see the bills. But where is that mail going? So these are some of the challenges. So the mail is going to our office at Pace, and we have a staff member that has permission 2 times a week to go pick up the mail for the office, and then we'll scan the mail to the attorney that's assigned to that particular client. And there's a gap. I mean, fortunately, this is not an emergency procedure, so we have the benefit of some time, but it is very challenging, and we are trying to figure out a multitude of ways to address the different challenges that we are seeing. I don't know if everyone's aware, but there is a moratorium on evictions. So no one can be evicted from their apartment during this period of time. And if that does happen, one of the other organizations within the county, Legal Services of the Hudson Valley, and the Hudson Valley Justice Center are assisting people who have eviction notices being sent to them by their landlords. So what else are we seeing? Well, when you have your younger, older adult population, they may be experiencing the financial loss that many others in the county are experiencing. And they may be deemed to be dispensable because of their age and closer to perhaps a retirement age. So not only are they struggling with losing their job, but the volatile stock market and the economic landscape is making it very challenging for them to figure out how to pay their bills and how to prioritize. Do I pay my food bill? Do I pay my medication bill? How am I getting my medication? Can I get deliveries? Who can order them for me? Who's living with me? If I have other family members, different generations living with me, maybe that situation existed beforehand and maybe it was working fine. But now we have people that are going out and hopefully going out safely and then coming back to the home and potentially putting other members of the family at risk. And there's a lot of fear that's going on. There are many online counseling sessions that are available. I believe that the Weill Cornell Center Gerontology Unit is providing that. And as I said, Family Services of Westchester is providing that. So what else do we know? So we try to gather as much information as possible because our helpline is still active and our walk-in clinic is still active. And those are two places where people can make phone calls and solicit information from attorneys. They can have a referral. They can have an attorney consultation. The New York State Pro Bono Network, which was formed by the New York State court system, is assisting jobless New Yorkers with unemployment benefits. So that's another resource that we might be referring people to, because I've had a question from someone where they were furloughed and they're concerned about their health insurance, because of course that's everyone's biggest concern as we are experiencing this pandemic. You know, they say that testing is free, but then what happens if you need the treatment? Who's going to pick up the bill? And so there's a huge concern with, am I going on COBRA? Am I on Medicare? Is there a certain date under which I need to apply? So these are some of the challenges that are faced by our population that is calling up. Specifically, I'm going to talk about how you can execute these documents when you cannot have a face-to-face meeting because of executive orders that Governor Cuomo has issued that are in effect until May 7th of 2020. It had been extended. You know, we've talked in the past about the importance of having advance directives. And now more than ever, it takes on a very new heightened importance. And why is that? Well, one of the reasons is that the expediency in which this disease takes over someone's life. You don't really have time to plan once you may have a diagnosis. I don't mean to sound like doom and gloom, but quite frankly, things progress differently with different people, and you don't know when you might not have the ability to speak for yourself because you've gone to the hospital, then you find out you need to be admitted and no one is permitted to accompany you to the hospital. You are dropped basically at the doorstep. So what are some of the documents that you should have? We've talked in the past about the importance of having a healthcare proxy and a living will. A healthcare proxy is a document that's triggered when you lose the capacity to speak and talk about what your medical wishes are. So in these times, a healthcare proxy, there on the New York State Department of Health, there is a standard healthcare proxy form that I would refer everyone to. But I would very much encourage you to edit it and personalize it and tailor it, because the reason why we've had healthcare proxies is people didn't want to be maintained on artificial hydration and nutrition when the prognosis was that they were not going to have the same quality of life after these measures were initiated. And the only way that you could prevent these measures from being started, these treatments from being started or having them withdrawn if they were started, is to have a document that says my agent knows my wishes regarding artificial hydration and nutrition and artificial respiration. And what is a ventilator? A ventilator is an artificial means of respiration. Also, many patients who develop very severe symptoms of COVID have kidney failure and they require dialysis. And dialysis may be an extraordinary measure. But you know what? These are things that are different than someone who, this is a condition that you can recover from. And so in my document, I have a statement, and I've told my husband, who is my healthcare agent, you're not pulling the plug on me just yet. And even though I've told you beforehand, I don't want to be maintained, I want to be put on a ventilator and I want dialysis if that's what the medical community is saying I need during this period of time. Now, these are not lifelong treatments. And I use that word a little too glibly, but they're not for, months and months at a time. It is for a limited period of time in order to deal with the drop in the oxygen levels that people with COVID experience, because it's a respiratory virus. So I urge everyone to have a healthcare proxy, to review it, to annotate it, to capture what your wishes are under different circumstances. And no one can predict what the future is going to be. And, but think about it and make sure you have a conversation with the person that you are placing in charge of your medical decisions so they know exactly what you want. I have a friend whose husband they're both physicians, and he was diagnosed with COVID and went downhill very quickly. And they called her and they said, do you want us to resuscitate him? And she said, of course I do. You need to do that until we know that there's no chance that he's going to recover. So think about the documents that you have. And the New York State Department of Health website has the documents in both English and in Spanish. So I encourage everyone to do it. I also encourage you, there's a website called compassionandsupport.org. It will give you the talking points that you need to think about when you're having conversations with your agent as you are creating these very important documents. But what happens if, and we've talked about this before, if you have no one whom you trust to make medical decisions for you? You are not married, or you're divorced, you have a very, bad, you had a very nasty divorce with your spouse, and so you certainly don't want that person to be your agent. You have children who are maybe too young, or maybe you have no children. You don't have siblings. You don't have a close friend whom you trust with making medical decisions for you. So what then? How do you get around having people know what you would want or not want? Well, that document is known as a living will. And the living will is a description of the medical treatment that you would want or not want without naming an individual directly. And the living will is something that we have helped clients in the past execute when they had no one to do so for them. Again, I would be very specific with the treatments that I would want and not want. Now, these are two documents that do not need to be notarized, but they definitely need to be witnessed. So how does that happen? And who can the witnesses be? Well, the witnesses can never be someone who you've named to be your to be your agent, and the witnesses can't be your healthcare provider. So how does this get executed? Well, Governor Cuomo issued an executive order on March 19th of this year, and it's executive order number 202.7. That order provides for either witnessing someone from a safe distance. So someone's in their apartment and you're standing outside, and you can be a witness standing outside. You don't need an attorney to do these documents. Or you can do it by a video conference. Just like we're doing this Zoom, you can do it by Skype, you can do it by FaceTime. As long as the witnesses know that it's you and that you are signing the document in their presence and you're dating it, that can be a valid document. Also, if you are unlucky enough to go into the hospital, you can execute a healthcare proxy or a living will when you're in the hospital. But again, I would encourage you to make sure it has your desires that are known and are written down. If you're already in a facility and you don't have these documents in place and you lose the capacity to be able to articulate your wishes, in 2010, the Family Healthcare Decisions Act was put into effect, and that provides a statutory order of priority as to who can make medical decisions for you. So we're not going to get into that because that's something that's done in either a group home or in a hospital setting. So we talked about the two healthcare documents, the healthcare proxy and the living will. Let's move on to a financial power of attorney. Many of you may be familiar with this document. This is something that is governed by the General Obligations Law. And what it does is it gives another person the ability to stand in your shoes and to make financial decisions for you that are in your best interest and in your best interest alone. The person that you appoint as your agent, you could also have two agents, or you could have one agent and a successor agent, needs to follow guidelines. They're a fiduciary, and they must only act in your best interest, or there can be legal consequences to their acting. So what is this document? This is, again, another document, that executive order issued by Governor Cuomo takes into account that allows for remote signing. Now, this is a document that must be notarized. So how does this happen? Well, it should be prepared by an attorney. In the unlikely event that you download one because you don't have access to an attorney, it still needs to be notarized. Perhaps at the end, we can get just, people can do a show of hands letting us know how many of you are notaries. Because if you are notaries and you may be called upon to serve in that capacity, there's now a special notary paragraph that needs to follow each of the signatures. That notary paragraph includes where you physically are. So everyone has to be in New York State. You don't necessarily have to be in the same county. So you could be notarizing someone who's in Queens or in the Bronx or in Brooklyn or in Rockland while you're in Westchester. But it has to state the county that you are in as the notary and the county that the individual is in who's signing the document. What is the unique quality of this document? It typically takes effect the minute it's signed by both the principal and the person that you're appointing as your agent. Now, the agent, the person who you're naming to carry out your financial decisions, does not have to be present with you in the same room, in the same building when you are signing. That person can sign at a different time. And again, their signature needs to be notarized. And once you have those two signatures, the principal and the person who is appointed as the agent, then that document is a valid power of attorney. And it can only be revoked when the person who names you as the agent, when the principal revokes it. And that's done in writing. The other way that it's revoked or it loses its effect is when the individual who's the principal dies, then the power of attorney is no longer a valid document. So what other document do I feel is of critical importance? And that is known as the appointment of an agent to control the disposition of remains. You know, we have talked with clients in the past when they've had second marriages and they wanted to be buried with their first spouse, or they wanted to be buried with their second spouse, or they wanted to be buried in a family plot that you know, their grandparents had purchased many, many years ago. And what happens is that under the law, and again, it's in an order of priority with family members, in listing of your relationship to the person who's passed, they're the ones who have the authority to say what your burial wishes are. If they're in a will, well, guess what? That's a little too late, because by the time the will is located and the will is filed with the court, and by the way, filing of a will is not considered an essential matter right now with the courts unless the person who is the nominated executor or the potential administrator of the person's estate needs to act quickly in order to preserve the assets of the person who died. So you cannot file a will in the court at this time to get fiduciary permission. So now you have someone who passed away in a hospital or passed away at home. And what do you do with the body? Where are you going to bury it? Are you going to cremate it? What did that individual want to happen? We got a phone call or an email from one of the offices of aging saying that there's an individual who was not married and had no children and no siblings and died in the hospital, and the hospital doesn't know what to do. They were calling us to see if we had ever prepared any documents for this person, and we hadn't. And honestly, I don't know what the solution was. I know that unless you have this document in place, which is a legal document, which must be notarized. Now, you don't need to have a prepaid funeral plan in effect. You can just say, I would like to be cremated and my ashes, whatever. I would like to be buried. My family has a plot, or I have an insurance policy that may pay for, my burial. This is a changing landscape, and it changes daily. So the appointment of an agent to control the disposition of remains is a very critical document in your toolkit at this time. And again, the remote notarization can take place. And the agent, just like with a financial power of attorney, the agent needs to sign the document acknowledging that they are accepting this responsibility. It doesn't mean that they're financially on the hook to pay for the funeral. It just means that they have the apparent authority to tell a funeral director what funeral arrangements the individual who passed would like to have. Now let's go to the last document, and that is the will. And I consider a will, unless you have oodles and oodles of money, I consider it a backup document. And why do I say that? I say that because for many people who may have bank accounts or brokerage accounts, they can designate, like a retirement account, you may have an IRA, you can designate a beneficiary to be the person who receives your asset upon your passing. And you don't have to go through a big formal process. You probably have to have a form signed and notarized that the financial custodian of your account has. But you can change that every week if you wanted to. They'd probably be, a little frustrated by you sending forms all the time. But you don't need a huge signing process in order to change the document. So you could, if you have a checking account and you're the sole person on the checking account, you could say in trust for, or for the benefit of, and that would only happen when you pass. Person who you designate to be your beneficiary only needs to present a death certificate and whatever other ID the bank is going to require in order to access that account. But let's just say you have a will, because you have some personal property and you have some family mementos and you're concerned about who's going to get grandma's dishes or grandpa's watches or some other items, or maybe there's a piece of property that you were married and you're now widowed and your spouse passed away and you never changed the title of the property, so it's in your name alone, and now you've passed. And so that piece of property has to go through the probate process. So you want to have a will. Well, as attorneys, we're always extra cautious when someone comes to us and tells us that they want to prepare a will and who they want to include as the beneficiaries of that will. We need to determine, is that person telling us of their own free will? Are they under any type of undue influence? So a group of attorneys that I've consulted with, we're very uncomfortable doing a remote signing of a will where we don't actually see who's in the room with the individual. And so what we would like to do is we would like to recommend that you go outside the person's home, or if the weather's nice, you can sit or stand outside in a circle. And the witnesses don't have to be present. The witnesses they can be videoed, or I would recommend that the witnesses come if you can bring people that can come with you, and you can have a signing of a last will and testament and the notarization done. If you can't do it in that distant face-to-face manner, you can do it in a video manner, but there are certain requirements that must be followed. And I'm not going to take up any more time in going through the nuts and bolts of that, but I just want to encourage everyone that they, if they have questions, that they can call our center, and if we can't assist you directly, then we can refer you to other agencies or perhaps other legal service providers that might be able to address your issues. Susan?
I was going to mention, and I think I see one question already in the chat, and I don't know if anyone else has any questions they want to put forth to the chat, and then I know Krishna will handle and letting us know. But I was also going to mention, and Nancy Tunis, you may have shared this already, but I mentioned a lot of obstacles for assistance for the first part of our conversation. What I should now focus as we start to get to the end is Westchester is a wonderful place, and it's evidenced by the fact that you all are here. And Nancy, I don't know if you shared already that wonderful list, or if I could share, because I sent it to Krishna just now.
Please share it.
Oh, terrific.
Definitely share it, Susan.
Perfect. Because the one great thing about our county, which is evidenced by you all participating this morning in the work you do at Westchester Library Systems and elsewhere in your community, is that, yes, the world has changed, at least for a while, but we're all still here, and we all want to help people, and we're just doing it a little differently. So I had sent it to Krishna just during this conversation, and thanks, Nancy, for letting me share it. But starting off with the Office for Women, they're a great sort of gateway place to check as well for resources. And in English, it's 914-995-5972. And under their umbrella is the Family Justice Center. That's right in the family court. In the past, meaning several weeks back, you could walk right into the courthouse and, oh, thanks, Krishna. But this is a multi-page document, and it has lists of some of the resources that exist in our county and just how they're serving people now remotely. We, as you know from meeting us, we help victims of intimate partner, sexual assault, and elder abuse, but there are other great agencies that work with these same populations in sometimes same ways or similar ways. And Legal Services, the Hudson Valley has a housing unit, and they're a great partner for us. Hudson Valley Justice Center deals with immigration concerns. There's free counseling in our county, and from Hope Store, My Sister's Place, Putnam, Northern Westchester Women's Resource Center. If you go to the courthouse, and in the past, if you went to the courthouse and didn't go to Family Justice Center, you could go to the Department of Probation, and a clerk there would assist you with writing an order of protection. Right now, they're also handling it remotely through a phone call. The one caveat I would say is if you have the opportunity and you're considering that, please feel free to call Nancy's office, Carrol, our office directly, because it's worth having a conversation with someone to talk about the safety planning aspects of seeking that order at first as well. and working with an attorney, and our services are free, you have the ability to both tailor your petition in ways that would benefit you at this time, and perhaps have a lengthier conversation, since probation provides a wonderful service, but it's a probation clerk who may be handling the petition slightly differently, and the intake process is different as well. There are other great, one thing we didn't touch on, but for our immigrant community and our residents of Westchester who lack status, this is an incredibly difficult time as well. For all the reasons that people are having financial stress and strain, it's certainly hitting those communities and members as well, and they may feel the safety net under them even less sturdy, for example, because they're not going to get any of this economic stimulation money, generally speaking, if they're not taxpayers on the books. And I highlight a concern within that. I know I've been working with a client from last week, given the fact that these stimulus checks, well, some of them were supposed to be deposited direct deposit last Wednesday for people who made single filers under 77,000 taxpayers. But there's been some hurdles in both delivery of those checks for a number of reasons. I've heard from clients whose abusers are now calling them saying they want some of that money, that they know they're going to get this check and they're going to come to their house and they want to get it. So I just want to highlight, if you know any community members or you're hearing about this, we don't want anyone just handing over money, either handing cash or handing it in a way that's not documented. The times are difficult right now with the economic situation. They become perhaps more difficult, and we want to make sure our clients are both keeping themselves safe and community members, and they're also documenting any money or assets they're sharing with their partners right now. I understand people might feel they need to share money quickly in a way to keep themselves safe and to perhaps be equitable, but we want to make sure it's both documented, and if they're in a confidential location or somewhere where their partner doesn't know currently, that they're not giving up that confidence and that security just to try to hand over money quickly. We also have Westchester Medical Center is great still for the resources. They're handling it a little differently because their SAVE unit, given the lack of PPE or protective equipment, they are no longer at this time face-to-face with sexual assault victims in the emergency department. But that client who's seeking those services immediately is given a sanitized iPad and is able to communicate as they go through the process, doing FaceTime with the SAVE advocate who's still in the hospital but on a different floor. So they're still coordinating their services. They're just doing it differently by giving that client an iPad and having them accompany it through the process, and allowing that sexual assault advocate to continue while the client is in the hospital setting, rather than just hearing about it after the fact. We've also sent along, and I think Krishna had distributed that earlier, just thanks, yep, perfect. A list of sort of what we're seeing and what we're hearing. And just to give you a sense, I know we didn't talk about this, but there was a client who felt she was a senior, and she was living with a younger grandchild who was an adult who had moved in some time ago, and that grandchild was not being safe, was flouting the CDC regulations, going out and partying, coming back and forth in a way that made that senior very uncomfortable. So our office and our attorneys were able to assist that senior in family court and to set up a situation where they didn't, continue to put their own health at risk while this person was not abiding by, both the CDC and New York State on pause requirements and the requests of the person she was living with, that senior. So we know that as the situation perhaps economically may continue in the short term to decline, that for some of our clients, they're going to feel pressure to share their assets, whether they're seniors and they have grandchildren, or perhaps adult children who are now lost their job, coming home thinking that, mom was going to give this to me anyway, and I'm not going to need it in 10 years. I need it now. I can't pay my rent. And if they're, perhaps abusing the powers of attorney or otherwise pressuring that senior parent to give over funds, we want to be able to work with that adult as well to help them both feel safe and feel economically secure during this time period. So please make sure you know that the Office for Women, that wonderful resource, and all the things they put together, those services exist for all of us in the community and any people we help. And certainly we are here, and we are happy to, as Roberta already said, if we can help you directly, we will. If we can suggest other resources, we'll do that too. and work to strategize with you together, if it be it judicial intervention through this remote way or other county services that exist that could help the situation.
Susan, can I just add one thing, please? We've had a few clients that this happened to where they were afraid to go to their own police departments for whatever reason. And it is now New York state law that you can walk into any police department and make a complaint. So I just want to remind people that if for some reason you're not comfortable in your own village with your own department, please go to a neighboring village.
Nancy, that's a wonderful point. And I would say for any of those individuals, in addition to going to the neighboring village, you can contact Nancy's office, Office for Women. You can contact us, and we can help coordinate in a way that gets that domestic incident report written in another community, then investigated properly in the community where you live, and provide protections wherever your home community is as you're seeking out.
Yeah.
And that's a great point. New York State has wonderful assistance in terms of support and great legislation now, so we want to make sure to be able to use it for our clients. I know, Kristen, there's some questions, so I'll let you field those now.
Yeah, so before we move into the questions, I just want to point out we did send out this this sheet, and we will send it out again along with the list of phone numbers here to everyone who's in this meeting. So if you have questions, enter them into the chat. I'm going to start going through. Carolyn, you asked whether we'd be able to download or purchase the forms for disposition of remains, and if so, location. So where can we download those?
I responded.
Oh.
So
From the New York. Okay.
can you see it?
It's called the New York Appointment of Agent to Control Disposition of Remains, and it should be publicly available. So
It is, and it's free.
okay.
There's no cost.
Okay. Maybe in the follow-up email, I'll include links to all of those forms that you mentioned.
Great. The New York State Department of Health forms and the agent to control disposition of remains.
Yep. And then I had another question that was sent to me privately, but it was it says, although you are the Women's Justice Center, I assume you would represent males,
see men.
Oh, yes.
particularly in elder situations.
And that's a great question. And I'm sorry I didn't lead with that. I feel like, we help everyone. Our name is a product of our start in the early 90s, when akin to when the battered women syndrome was first becoming sort of a syndrome in New York State, and educating police and prosecutors about it. But we do help everyone.
Okay, do we have more questions? Feel free to type them into chat if you have any.
And if you don't, I know Roberta and I just want to say thank you. We appreciate Krishna and Elena being asked to participate in this discussion this morning. And we really appreciate all the help that all of you are providing to your communities and your desire to stay engaged and make a difference.